Welcome back to part two of our delicious conversation with Howard Behar. He was the president of the most well-known coffee company brand in the world. That would be Starbucks, as I'm sure you're aware. He helped take the company from 28 stores to 15,000 across 5 continents. In part one of the show, we were talking about his conflict that he had very early on in his career, where he was being told who he needed to be as an executive after being promoted to an executive, and really going through this internal conflict of questioning who he was and whether he needed to be somebody different if he was going to step into that role, and what happened as a result of that. We talked about him being brought into Starbucks, the conflict with Howard Schultz, and the operating system of what Starbucks was really all about and how that transformed over time, and that he was with the company for 28 years. There's a whole bunch of really great stuff in part one. If you, for some reason, didn't catch it and you just sort of landed here in part two, go back. I promise you there's some really fascinating things in here, including talking about what conscious capitalism, which I think is a really important thing. Howard, as we get into part two of the show, you've reframed work for yourself as a mission of nurturing the human spirit. I believe that's what you said, shifting to focus on people and purpose rather than profit. Talk to us about what you mean by nurturing the human spirit.
Well, I believe that as a leader, that our responsibility is to help people grow. Mm-hmm. And when we help people grow, what happens to them? They start to feel better about themselves, and they start to think of themselves in a different way. And that's what I was trying to do. I tried to do it inside of Starbucks. Now, that mission statement came later in my life. I had mission statements that were much different than that before, that were much more, what let's call practical. Like I wanted to be the top leader in the home furnishings industry. I was in the home furnishings industry for 25 years. And when I got to Starbucks and I realized that this was about people, I even more signed on for that. And I plagiarized what Starbucks, what they call their BHAG, Jim Collins' Big Hairy Audacious Goal, which goes like this. We want to be one of the most well-known and respected organizations in the world, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. When I heard those words, known for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit, I said, that's me. That's me. And so I changed my mission. And this has been a driving force for the past 30 years. With inside of an organization, I'm outside. I'm 80 years old now, and I'm still trying to do that work. And I do it with opportunities like you're giving me to do. And hopefully this helps somebody think differently about themselves and what they can accomplish. And so that's what I try to do. And I try to do it every day. Sometimes it's little tiny things. Sometimes it's picking up a piece of paper off the street. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's putting your arm around somebody that needs a hug. Sometimes it's just saying to my grandkids, I love you. But a lot of times when I may have the opportunity to help somebody in the business world or in organizations think differently about themselves and how they lead. And so I'm just trying to help them think better about themselves. What I like to say, I'm trying to help them love themselves unconditionally.
This is very much what we were talking about in part one, is this idea of nurturing the human spirit. You and I are definitely on the same path with that one. But a lot of people just don't see that that is possible in today's work environment. They just don't see that if they said that, they would be removed. They would be sidelined very quickly. So to those people who are of that spirit, if they're listening right now, what would you say to them who work in an environment that's definitely not friendly to that, and they feel like they have to shove that down somewhere? What would you say to them?
Number one, I'd say, are you married to the right person? We're not victims in terms of where we work. We can make those choices. Now, sometimes we get into an organization that is servant-led, and then a new leader comes in and says, nah, I don't believe in any of that stuff. And you have to decide, let's say that you're a mid-level leader in an organization. You can practice servant leadership in your micro-organization. And if somebody says, stop, we don't want to do that, then I'd ask you, really, are you in the right place? Because if you've got to be in conflict with your own personal values where you work, you're not going to have a very fulfilling life. It just doesn't work. It's just like if you're married to somebody that goes shoplifting every day and brings the stuff home and says, how do you like what I got today? But you're an honest person. That isn't going to work, is it?
No.
You can't sell your soul for the place that you work. It's not any fun. You're not going to have a fulfilling life. And you're certainly not going to be a happy camper. So I think, you got to be willing to bet your job. I said it before, and I really mean that. You're talking to a guy that's been through this.
Yes.
I reported to somebody that used to come in and call me dummy every day. Honest to God, that's what he'd say. Now, he was actually a nice guy.
You have me confused. I'm sorry. I find that a little iffy. Nice guy.
But he was a nice guy. He didn't understand when he did things like that, what it did to people. It brought me down. Until finally one day he came in and he said that to me. I got up out of my chair. His name was Erwin Greenwald. I'll never forget. He was about 6'4" and I'm about 5'10". And I looked up and said, Erwin, don't you ever effing say that to me again. 3 weeks later, I was fired.
Sure.
All right. I understand. So I went on, and I didn't have money in the bank. I figured out a way, and I took a part-time job selling furniture and made some money and brought a little cash in until I figured out where I was going. I just wasn't going to put up with that. I just wouldn't.
We're coming back to where we were in part one, which is this idea of leadership in a different form, because we think of leadership as the person who barks the orders, the person who makes the big decisions, whatever. But in my work with leaders, I say there is no real leadership unless there is the leadership of self. And I know that you talk about that being the hardest form of leadership. How do we get people to understand that leadership is still so many ways? I mean, we're seeing it now even at a political level. It's about arrogance. It's about barking orders. It's about speaking down to people, demoralizing people. I don't believe in that kind of leadership at all. And I think that you can't really lead in a way that has a positive, lasting effect without having self-leadership, self-knowledge. Talk to us about what you mean when you talk about self-leadership.
Well, the most difficult person you'll ever have to lead in your life is you.
Mm-hmm.
We have this board of directors that sits on our shoulders, and they're yapping at us all the time. Talk, talk, talk. We try to influence our behavior and what we say, what we do. And you have to learn how to manage that board of directors, because some board members are not so nice. Some board members are judgmental, they're critical, they're abusive, and they encourage you to be the same way. There are some board members that are caring and loving and want to support people and care about people. And there's some board members that are greedy. There's some board members that are sharers that want to give of themselves all the time. And you have to decide which board members you're going to listen to. Those are the conflicts that we have. And so you can make the choice to guide your personal organization, the organization of self, of how you're going to behave. That doesn't mean everything you do is going to be perfect. It is not. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to say the wrong thing to somebody. You're not going to care about somebody in the way that they need to be cared about. But you can make that choice. And so it's the choices you need to make. And you're exactly right. We're seeing so much of choices being made about how people are being treated, and particularly the political environment. It's around the world, and it's particularly true in the country that I live in right now. I am scared to death that young people are going to see this as the model for leadership. And you particularly see it, and I hate to say this, but you see it in the field of technology, in the technology field. This is not bad people, good people, by the way. I want to make sure I'm clear about that. This is about people that have a different view, and the voices they listen to are different voices than a servant leader would listen to.
Yes.
This is a problem, and we're facing it right now. I'm not so sure how it's going to come out.
Well, that's my pushback to you, is how do we guide these young leaders who are listening to these very powerful voices who say there is no room for the kind of leadership you're talking about, this servant leadership? We can see the guys with all the power and all the money are the guys who are dictatorial. You kind of remind me of 1950s leaders, and that's because I'm old, but they remind me of 1950s leaders that I read about who were harsh and abusive and vindictive and pre-union mentality, who just really shit on people.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a huge issue. Now, let's look at some examples. So let's take a concrete example. Let's take Microsoft. Gates and Steve Ballmer were obviously very smart guys.
Yes.
But Bill Gates was abusive.
Mm-hmm.
His view of the world was, if I'm harsh on people, if I'm hard on people, then they'll work harder, they'll be smarter, they'll do better things. So That did not work over a long period of time. It worked in the early days because they basically controlled the game in terms of software.
Absolutely.
It was relatively easy for them. But as soon as it got a little more difficult, what happened? Microsoft went static.
Yes.
People are leaving Microsoft. They don't want to work there. Ballmer makes a whole bunch of mistakes because he thinks he's God and he made the right decisions all the time. He didn't. So finally, both of them are gone for different reasons. And the guy that works in Microsoft, I forget his name right now, guy that is the head of the CEO of Microsoft, he'd been there, but he'd operated as a servant leader behind the scenes.
Yes.
By who he was to his people. And what does he say to the people? Hey, the single most important quality any leader needs to have is empathy. A complete change.
Absolutely.
And what happens to Microsoft? All of a sudden, the stock goes up, the results go up. It goes back and forth between, I think, Amazon and or whoever and Microsoft, the most valuable company in the world. And people want to work there again because they feel that they're cared about.
Absolutely.
And there's a concrete example of how it works. And let's take the opposite of that. Let's take Uber. The guy that founded Uber was an absolute asshole.
Yep.
He was abusive to his people, and eventually he got found out. And it was so bad that the board had finally had to make a decision to boot him out. Now, did he make a lot of money there? He did, but he was gone. He no longer abused his people because his people didn't want to work there. And so, look, you can be anything you want to be. You want to be a jerk? Go ahead. Have at it. You're not the kind of guy that I'm going to work with. And we have these choices to make. But I just think the real pathway to success is with people, not on the backs of people. It's helping people be all they can be in a productive, kind way. It doesn't mean that you're not coaching and you're not honest. And if there's something that needs to be said to help somebody improve, you say it. But you do it in a way that's supportive, that doesn't detract from who they are as a human being.
I like Satya Nadella's leadership style. He's done a lot of amazing things. And of course, they're leading in the AI world these days because of him. But, you know, one of the things I really loved about his philosophy was this idea of Microsoft before was the know-it-all company. They knew all the answers. And as you said, that got them stuck. And Nadella's approach was to learn it all, to just keep learning, just having this growth mindset, as well as compassion and empathy, etc. And it's put them at the top of the game, a place that they've not been for decades because of that mentality. And I think it's really important for young leaders to keep that in mind, that it's easy to look at the hard-ass, mean leaders and think, well, that's the only way to make it. But you have to also look at people like Satya Nadella, who has done such an incredible job based on servant leadership, based on serving and having people work with him rather than under him or under that authority. That's a really great example.
It's the same way at home. My job as a husband to my wife, Lynn, is to be supportive, caring, loving, and to help her achieve what she wants to achieve in life, not to tell her what to do. Because we know how that works. It doesn't. And it doesn't work in organizations either.
No, I agree.
When you're that autocratic boss, you can create fear in your organization.
So you talk about something that I think is an extension of this. I've had this challenge. I read a book many, many years ago, which I'm sure you're familiar with, called The Road Less Traveled. Some of our younger leaders will not know what that book is. But the book was written by a military psychiatrist, which many people don't know that's what he was. And he had studied psychiatry and become a therapist, and it was drilled into him that you can't become emotionally involved with the people that you're serving. And he said, if I don't care about the people I'm serving, I'm not doing my job. And so for me, I took that on as a leader. I took that on from reading that book. And so even now, today, I'm approached all the time and I say I will turn away people because my answer is, if I can't fall in love with you, I'm not going to work with you. It's got nothing to do with romance, but it's like, I got to give a shit about you so much that I'm willing to say things to you that you won't let yourself say to yourself because I love you enough to care. And I know that you really hold that piece around love and leadership. Give me your understanding of that. Help us to understand that.
Well, like you said, that it's not the familial love, but it's the love of that person because they're a human being and they're worthy of your love and respect. That's the way I've always approached it. So if I had to coach somebody, something went wrong, somebody made a huge mistake, as long as it wasn't a mistake of commission, intentional mistake to do damage or to hurt somebody, I could deal with it with you. And I would be kind and caring, but direct and honest. That's what it is. And that's what makes great marriages work. Lynn knows I love her because I show love in all sorts of ways. But if there's something that's bothering me, I say it to her. But I do it in a way that's supportive, not taking away, in a way that's caring. And that's the difference. I have had to coach a lot of people out of companies.
Exactly.
Hundreds of people in my lifetime. And I have always wanted to treat them as well going out the door as I treated them coming in the door. And I wanted to love them as much going out the door. And that's what I always try to practice. Did everybody always understand? No.
No.
But my attention was always there. I can count on one hand the conflicts that came from all the people that had to leave the organization that couldn't understand. And sometimes you can't fix those things, but that doesn't mean you give up.
No.
You still support. And so love is important in business as it is anywhere else, in any organization. If you love your people, they know it and they will love you back.
And if you don't love your people, particularly today, if you don't love your people, they will find somebody who does. They'll leave you. They may stick around because they need a paycheck, but they'll only stick around long enough to replace you with somebody who gives a shit about them, who actually cares. So on that, can you share an experience where your personal values came into conflict, were at odds with a corporate decision? How did you navigate that conflict?
This happened late in my career at Starbucks. As a matter of fact, just when I decided to leave the board. This was 2007, 2008. And we were going to have to go through some layoffs because we were closing a bunch of stores.
Right.
I understood that. I'm not naive. I've been doing this a long time. But we let go a bunch of people that we didn't have to let go. We had plenty of money in the bank. And we let go a bunch of people that bled green. They bled Starbucks. And I didn't want to do that. I said, let's just bite the bullet and keep them. So the stock won't go as high as we want. But there was this conflict on the board. There was conflict within Howard and I about the layoffs. And he finally decided that he was going to do it. And I said, okay, you do it once. You only get one shot at this because if you do it twice, you break trust. And he did it twice. I was on the board. I wasn't in leadership at that time and management at that time. And I decided to leave the organization because I couldn't live with it. And that's when I wrote the second book, The Magic Cup. It was a fictional story about a board that didn't understand what was going on and a bunch of pink slips floating from the sky coming down. And that was when I bet my job. I just said, I can't live with this. So it was a conflict. Now, sometimes you don't need to leave the company because there's a conflict. Sometimes the conflict is small or smaller, and it's not something that you're absolutely giving up on your values, but there's just a difference of opinion about something.
Sure.
Sometimes you say, is this something that is really so important to me that I can't make some room? And sometimes you do have to make some room, and you have to decide what are deal breakers and what are not.
What's non-negotiable? What is not non-negotiable?
And sometimes they're negotiable things. Dishonesty was not something that was negotiable for me. Abusing people was not negotiable for me. But what products we sold or what things, how we made the drinks, sometimes we'd have huge arguments about it. The idea that we weren't in the coffee business serving people, but in the people business serving coffee caused a lot of conflict in the company. But I didn't give up on it. I just stayed with it. It was hard to get fired at Starbucks for missing your numbers. It was easy to get fired at Starbucks for screwing with the people.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm still convinced that they screw up my name on purpose. And I used to take photographs of every time they would make my name wrong because it was this running joke. You know, I'd be Doug or I'd be Don. And sometimes I'd be some weird, wild name that I can't even remember. But I was never upset by it. I always found it funny.
No, it was because they weren't listening well. When I'd go in and they didn't know who I was, I might say Jim or Bob because I knew they would get Jim or Bob.
You know they get that right. So looking back on your illustrious career, what do you hope that your leadership legacy is, and how do you believe future leaders can sort of build upon today's ever-changing business landscape?
Well, people ask, what have you valued most in your career or in your life? And it's always the same answer for me. The people that I've helped become all they could be. That may have worked in the companies I've worked with, but I helped them grow as human beings, grow as professionals, and they went on to do great things. Christine Day, who ran Lululemon for a while as a CEO, she was one of those. And I've had a whole bunch. When I look back at my career, it's always been that. Who are the people that have really gone out and done great things, taken servant leadership with them and taken it to another place and brought it into practice in those organizations? And so that's always, to me, the most pride that I have. But here's how I want to be remembered. I want to be remembered for nurturing and inspiring the human spirit. I want to be remembered for that guy that set out to do something for other people. And did he do it perfectly? Did he achieve it all the time? No. But as I'm sitting in that rocking chair at the Klein-Gallen home, which is the Jewish nursing home in Seattle, and say, you know what? I wasn't perfect, but I did a pretty damn good job. I lived my life with intention, and I lived out that intention.
Beautiful. Now, you're 80 years old as we record this, and we're very grateful, and it's just an honor to be here with you. Think about where you started out in life. What would that boy say about you?
Are you kidding me? That boy would never have believed that this boy could have ever gotten here. I had a mother that was always trying to help me, but she had this deal where she'd say, not everybody can be. Whenever I'd come home and say, geez, I'd like to do, and she'd say, well, Howard, not everybody can be. And I internalized that as if I wasn't capable till my mid-20s, till I finally pushed back against it and said, no, I am capable. But it wasn't she was trying to hurt me. She thought she was supporting me and giving me room. And instead of pushing me like I pushed my kids to understand that they could do anything they wanted to do, she was kind of the opposite. It took me a while to recover from that, and I did finally. And I realized that I was capable and I had to push myself to do things that I never thought I could before. I ran into one guy that was probably the most important mentor of my life, and he was the one that introduced me to servant leadership. He was the one that taught me about affirmations, that whatever I thought about myself I could do, I would be. If I thought poorly of myself, that's what I'd become. If I thought well of myself, that's what I would become. And he was so right. And he was the one that taught me to write down all of this, write down my values, have a mission statement for myself, and have a 5-year plan. He changed my life, that one guy.
How old were you when you met him?
I was 27, and he was only 3 years older. He was 28. But he had the life experiences that I hadn't had.
So may I ask, is your mother still around as she passed?
Oh, she passed many years ago.
So what would she say about this, Howard?
Why do you work so hard? Honest to God. She was in the nursing home and I was already at Starbucks. I was telling her about what I was doing. So why do you work so hard? Why are you doing that? It was just who she was. From an immigrant family of 13 children from Latvia, the last born. Her life was just different than mine. She was a hard worker, by the way.
Sure.
But in a different way. I was talking to my psychiatrist the other day. I still have a psychiatrist, believe it or not.
Excellent. I do believe it. And I'm very glad you brought that up because, again, we come back to this. The hardest leadership is self-leadership, and you can't have that without self-examination. And that's not a destination. That's an ongoing process. Whether you have a psychiatrist or a therapist or a coach or whatever you want to call it.
I used to think by the time I hit 70, it would be perfect. No anxiety, no depression, everything would be perfect in my life. It's just not the way that it is.
No.
So I asked for help when I needed it, and I have an ongoing relationship with somebody. Those issues that I dealt with, a mother, with lots of us have, or a father, we have those issues that we have to live with and have to deal with. Anyway, I was talking to the psychiatrist the other day, and we got into something I'd never really talked about that issue, about that neither one of my parents were both incredibly hard workers. Depression era. My dad was born in the late 1800s. My mother was born in the early 1900s. Hard workers and everything. And they worked hard and they did lots of great things in their life, but they never pushed me. And it was an odd thing as I look back at in my life. Now, do I hold them accountable? No. I was capable and I just didn't understand at the time. But I finally learned to push myself.
But I think there's something that needs to be clarified in that statement and from what you just said. You pushed yourself, but the fact of the matter is that if you'd have pushed yourself in a direction that wasn't yours, that would have been a failure. You pushed yourself in a way that allowed you to question what you held as true. And that's the important thing that I think is vital here, because many important people will say, well, I pushed myself and I became what Charlie told me I should be, and I stuffed my feelings. I think that this is the act of courage. One of the things that I talk about a lot is self-courage. The courage to be yourself means you will get slapped. You're going to get slapped. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get kicked to the curb. You're going to get spit on. All the shitty things are going to happen, but there's going to come a point in your life where you're going to go, oh, that was so great because it turned the direction. And I said, I have to be me because that's all I got.
I'm not talking about the parents that push their kids to be who they want them to be. I'm talking about the parents that challenge them to be all they could be.
Yes.
And whatever that was.
Yes.
Oh, yes, that's the difference right there.
So what's the final sort of parting guidance you'd like to leave us with, Howard? I really appreciate your wisdom and your kindness and your generosity here today, and you've got so much to offer, and I really appreciate it. So what's the sort of parting words you want us to leave with?
Live your life with intention. Live your life in a way that supports the things that you value most, your values, that supports your greater purpose in life, whatever you choose that to be, and supports you as a human being so that you can look back when you're 80 years old like me and say, okay, attaboy, not too bad, Howard.
Thank you, Howard. It's been a pleasure and honor, sir. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, your books.
Let's see. I'll give you my cell phone number again, 206-972-7776. That's 206-972-7776. And my email address is hb@howardbr.com. I will respond to everybody. If you reach out to me, I'll respond.
That's amazingly generous. Maybe abyssal sugar, but we appreciate it nonetheless. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Leaders who are committed to positively shaping the political and business landscape know that they've got to tap into what drives human behavior. I'm Dov Baron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness the emotional source code to move their tribe, because unified actualized meaning is the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. Remember, we need your help in staying relevant, so please go to wherever you tune into the show from and do us a favor. Rate, review, and subscribe to the show, because it makes a huge difference and we really appreciate it. And of course, a big thank you to you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about what it means to lead from intention, purpose, and your true values. Take the time to really find out what that is. Don't just scribble a few words down and go, oh, that's a cool value to have. If it's not non-negotiable, if you're not willing to die on that hill, it's not really yours. And that's going to take you some time to work out. You're not going to do it in 5 minutes. Take some time, get some help, and do that. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.